This broke last night. Absolutely took me by surprise. And that has to do with Katie Halper, who, if you guys have been paying attention, has been doing some guest hosting on the show Rising. But not only that, she's basically been a part of Rising since the beginning. If you guys were watching back in the day on the Hill when Crystal and Sagar were still holding it down over at Rising before they infamously left and started Breaking Points, that seems like so long ago. But if you guys remember back then, Katie Halper would come on every single week for a weekly segment about the media, and they would kind of make fun of different media segments and stuff like that. So Katie Halper is a longtime mainstay of the Hill's Rising, and this is absolute insanity, guys. She posted this last night. I was censored and fired by the Hill over defending Rashida Tlaib and labeling Israeli apartheid. The good news, I shot the censored video with an actually independent media outlet, see below, and we'll check that out in a second. But this is absolute insanity. I mean, imagine if during apartheid South Africa, a journalist came out here and said, I am against apartheid South Africa. And then people said, so you're against South Africa's right to exist? Like no one would say that, but because the situation has to do with Israel and Palestine, that's the line from all of these defenders of Israelis' apartheid policy, which is that to even criticize their system of apartheid is to criticize Israel itself and to say that Israel itself doesn't have a right to exist. Period. When that's a complete bastardization, a complete perversion of the sentiment that's actually being expressed, which is that progressives should not support apartheid. So Israel can still exist. You can't support the apartheid element of it. In the same way that, back during apartheid South Africa, you could still support South Africa's right to exist as a country without defending their system of apartheid. Add to that, as one of our commenters in chat pointed out, Katie Halper is literally a Jew herself. So this is absolute insanity from basically every direction.
Yeah, look, it's one of those weird things in American media that this is like a line in the sand that I feel like they just won't let you fucking cross because they know that the public opinion is changing. It's changing quickly on this. The more that people see, the more that people understand about what is actually being done. The legitimate conditions that people are forced to live in, the massive inequality, all of the different things, the downright fucking violence, the murders, all these things that occur. Nobody can support that when you know what's happening, right? So they have to have a airtight fucking lock on the narrative here. And since that started to fall apart recently, right? And now it's like not that compelling for people to just be like, oh, you're an anti-Semite. That's why you want, fucking equality for Palestinians in Israel. It's like, no, I believe in equality across the board. Check my record, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? But so they've had to really put their foot down, right? Especially with anytime you see typically independent individuals branch out into mainstream media. This is one of those things I feel like it always comes back around and they get fired, right? So obviously you have Katie Halper with The Hill, and it's always important to remember, The Hill is not independent, right? It's owned by a billionaire that was a big Trump guy. We've talked about this 10 million times. But Nathan Robinson used to have a monthly column in The Guardian, right? And we have obviously Nathan Robinson's a bit of a mixed bag over at Current Affairs, but he was advocating a very correct position on Israel-Palestine in The Guardian, and The Guardian was like, yeah, go fuck yourself. You don't ever write for us again. And it's just like, what? I mean, and it's the same thing. Like, and Nathan Robinson, doesn't happen to be Jewish, but obviously he's not like a fucking anti-Semite. He was just advocating for fucking equality, but they tried to portray it as like, oh my God, like, we can't support this kind of like fucking, bigotry and all that kind of junk. And it's the same shit that like even Bernie, who had a fucking terrible ass policy on Israel, he had to bat away the like, oh, self-hating Jewish man, like fucking all that kind of like ridiculous, downright offensive accusations. So yeah, it just seems like in American media, this is one of those things where they know that the narrative is changing and they don't know what to do about it. So all they can do is just like fucking go full on totalitarian free speech denialism.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think that pretty recently, within the last year or two, the Hill actually was sold to a local news powerhouse called Nexstar. So it's actually no longer owned by that Trump supporting billionaire. I think his name was James Finkelstein. That's who used to own the Hill, but then it was sold to Nexstar Media Group, a television news company, for $130 million. So yeah, it's pure corporate media. Don't get it twisted, despite the fact that they've platformed, independent minded voices like Katie Halper, like Brianna Joy Gray, like Olayemi Olor, and people that, we have on the Vanguard and talk to. Despite the fact that they've employed some independent minded people, the Hill is not in any way, shape, or form independent media. They're corporate to the core. And honestly, it's a miracle that they let people like Katie Halper, speak on that platform in the first place. But apparently this was the line they could not cross, which I find odd for a number of reasons. For one, again, as I said, Katie Halper has been a longtime mainstay of the Hill's rising, and they've recently seemingly been kind of promoting her as an up and coming actual host. Why would they try to bring her on board as this host, full well knowing her positions on these issues? I mean, if you subscribe to the Katie Halper Show on YouTube, basically every single clip is about foreign policy. She constantly talks about Israel and Palestine. This is like one of her main issues. I would say like one of her top 5 issues, probably. So did they not know she held this opinion? Or were they just never expecting her to espouse it on their platform? Either way, it's stupid. Like, why would you bring on this person, promote them as a host, constantly have them on as a guest, and then as soon as they want to talk about one of their opinions that everyone already knows they have, nope, you're done, you're fired, it's over? Makes no sense to me. It seems totally out of the blue. But I guess we can watch Katie's video here and see exactly what happened.
Yeah, it just reminds me a lot of what happened with fucking Rolling Stone and Useful Idiots. It was like they fired them for their political opinions. It was like, what the fuck did you expect from Matt Taibbi and Katie Halper? They're going to go out there and they're going to say what the fuck they think. And if you've read any of their or seen any of their previous work, you kind of got to know what you're signing up for. That's why people want to watch it. But anyway.
The Hill wants to boss workers around instead of finding ways to empower them. Horrible leadership. Before we get into this video, because I do want to watch Katie's video where she explains what happened. This reminds me of a tweet that I saw from Glenn Greenwald that I thought was so accurate as to this whole situation. He said, "A media outlet that pretends to air free debates, but then fires journalists for expressing views disliked by management isn't about journalism, but activism. It shouldn't matter what you think about Israel. It gets billions from the U.S., and Katie Halper has the right to debate it." He then goes on to say, "This is bizarre to watch. The Hill stumbled by accident into a great and highly popular program, Rising, built by Crystal and Sagar. Since then, they've done everything to destroy it, from driving that duo away to now firing Katie Halper, an American Jew, for Israel heresy." That's so true. And also, let's not forget the whole episode with Kim Iverson. I'm not the biggest fan of Kim Iverson as a commentator, but there's no doubt she was raking in the views for the Hill. She was getting a lot of views for the Hill, like comparable to what Sagar and Crystal were getting back in the day. They also kind of drove her away by excluding her from the Fauci interview that she ended up quitting over. So yeah, now they're down to what, just Brianna and Robbie. They lost Ryan. They lost Emily to Breaking Points. They've now fired Katie Halper. They lost Kim Iverson. Obviously, they lost Crystal and Sagar. Now they're literally just down to Brianna and Robbie. It's only a matter of time before Brianna Joy Gray says something that's like slightly too far out of the mainstream that she gets fired too. Like, what the fuck? Is this just going to literally become any other shitty news show that no one wants to watch because you fire all your talent? It's crazy.
Yeah, I think it's funny. It's one of those like bad management decisions too, because I just don't think, I don't think financially, like maybe like they're just not making like a ton of money from it. So they're just like kind of putting it out to another, but you think that would be antithetical to how you would run a news media outlet. Like you want to reach people, you want to grow, you want to have all these things. And the only reason I say that is because I remember Crystal talking about back in the day, like they actually had to twist the Hill's arm for them to even put it on YouTube in the first place. So maybe they've just decided that this is like a bigger thorn in their side than it's worth. But yeah, it's ridiculous. I mean, mean, we've watched them go through. I mean, one of our most viewed videos of all time and one of my favorites that we've ever done was when we were dragging the shit out of the like Diet, Crystal, and Sagar that they had paraded out there like a week after Crystal and Sagar left to go to Breaking Points, and they were just god fucking awful. It was horrible. They had no original insights to say at all. They brought on like this like crazy OAN lady and a guy that looked like Roger Federer, and it was like, let's have a neoliberal talk to a fucking crazy person for like 20 minutes. It's like, I'm not gonna watch that. I don't think anybody else is. And their views just fucking tanked, ate shit. It wasn't until they started bringing in heterodox people like Kim Iverson, like Brianna Joy Gray, that really it started to pick back up again.
Absolutely. And some people in the chat are raising the good comments. It's like I hope that Brianna Joy Gray starts, giving her take on Israel nonstop. Like, so is Brianna Joy Gray not allowed to talk about how Israel is an apartheid state now? Like, this really does raise those questions going forward. It's like, so when I watch, Brianna do a segment or whatever, like, do I have to know now that in the back of her mind, she's thinking, can't talk about Israel because I have to, I can't lose my job. That creates some really weird kind of, censorship going on here. That, I mean, if I was working for the Hill, I don't know what I'd do. I mean, obviously it's hard to just say goodbye to a fat paycheck and your livelihood. I'm not saying anyone has to do that. But do I want that in the back of my, like, if I was on this show and I in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, I can't talk about this one really important thing because, Zach's going to fire me or something. Like, I wouldn't want to fucking do that necessarily. Like, it would just be weird to sit here and be like, knowing in the back of my mind, like, oh shit, I got to, kind of walk on eggshells when it comes to this one topic. You know what I'm saying?
100%. I mean, that kind of goes back to the initial theory of independent media, right? I mean, the whole idea about not working for places where they can control you like this, because then it's not independent media. It's a lousy fucking like it's a cheap facsimile, right? Like, or facsimile or whatever the fuck that phrase I'm looking for. Excuse me. Yeah, it's not the same, right? And it does try and present itself as this like independent media. And I remember Crystal and Sagar both talked about that a lot. They were like, we felt uncomfortable being looped in with the independent media group because we really weren't independent. And do you know what's funny? I don't know why it kind of like reminds me of like, Kevin Smith when he would talk about being in the studio system. He was like always described as like an independent fucking filmmaker, but he wasn't, and that's what fucked him down the road. That's why we don't have fucking Dogma 2 coming down the pipeline. But that's a weird like curveball example. But it's like, yeah, when you're not like actually independent, you're just kind of playing independent, like you're doing dress up like the fucking actual independent people do. I'm not saying there's not a purpose for a show like Rising, and I don't begrudge anybody that goes on there and does it. Like, that's their business. It wouldn't be the job for me, especially knowing what I know now, but I've kind of known that since, I mean, Crystal and Sagar left, right? Remember when they banned Kyle from coming on the show? They were like, Kyle is talking shit on us on his show. He's not allowed to be on here anymore. And that was a big part of why Crystal and Sagar were like, well, what the fuck? You can't tell us who to have on our show. We're leaving. So we've always known, right? And to be honest, guys, people used to like fucking drag Ryan Grimm through the mud for working at The Intercept, right? And they would drag him for like being Piero Miglior's little bitch, right? And then everybody just like kind of got rid of that criticism when a lot of commentators that they like started working for a conglomerate. They were like, Kim Iverson is independent. It's like, yeah, well, weren't you just like pulling your fucking hair out saying that Ryan Grimm couldn't be trusted for anything because he worked for Piero Miglior? Worst billionaires fund fucking The Hill, right? So it's like, okay, guys, like eat your fucking crow on that one. So anyway, we've always kind of known this. It's always been the like quiet secret. It's like, yeah, we react to this because there's a lot of good points that get made on this show, but it's not independent media. Like, and clearly this is, the chickens came home to roost on that one.
Yeah, it just makes me glad I don't work for a goddamn corporation, to be honest. I mean, I've never been watching this kind of shit go down. Just makes me so glad to have our own thing, 100% viewer funded. As someone said, the only people that can fire us is our patrons. So if you think we're talking smack, you can unsubscribe to us or whatever. But we don't have some fucking corporate overlord coming down here to say you're not allowed to talk about that. Like, you overstepped the line. Like, it's just so fucking, I can't imagine it. I can't imagine it. Anyway, let's hear from Katie herself about what exactly went down. This is all very, very dramatic and unexpected. So, let's just take a look here.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Katie Halper Show. I'm your host, Katie Halper, as you know. And as you all know, I do host, obviously, the Katie Halper Show. I also host Useful Idiots, another podcast and YouTube show. And I recently had started doing some guest co-hosting at Rising, which is a YouTube show hosted by The Hill. I even pitched a show to The Hill, which was a lefty version of The View, which we shot a pilot for last Friday. And for the last 3 years, I've appeared on The Hill's Rising as a guest once a week to do a weekly segment on media and politics. And I've always really enjoyed working with The Hill. And I felt like I was given the freedom to talk about whatever I wanted to talk about. And I really did see it as a place free of the censorship and the kind of like party line enforcement that defines other corporate media. So as I said, I'd been doing some guest hosting at The Hill, and I really enjoyed it. And I hosted this Monday and had already lined up some more hosting events for the near future. And Rising hosts do these things called radars, which are basically monologues delivered straight to the camera. So I wanted to deliver a monologue about Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib being criticized by some over comments she made about people who are progressive except on Palestine. And she was slammed for describing Israel as an apartheid state. So my monologue basically defended Tlaib and kind of broke down why Israel is, in fact, an apartheid state. So I wrote my monologue and I delivered it, and The Hill filmed it, but then they did not air it. And when I pushed back against their not airing it, I was fired, not just as a host, but also as a weekly contributor, which is something I'd been doing again for 3 years. So I do want to be clear that the producers I worked with were nothing but supportive. They were great, and they really wanted their higher ups, their bosses, the executives to do the right thing. But sadly, they wouldn't. And this is obviously really sad and frustrating and disappointing and infuriating. And there's nothing I can do about their decision to not run the monologue. And there's nothing I can do about their decision to stop working with me or to fire me. But what I can do, and what I did do, was film and release the video that they wouldn't air. So I reached out to an actually progressive, actually independent, actually uncensored media outlet called Breakthrough News. And we made the video. So it's going to be coming out tonight at Breakthrough News. You'll be able to find it at Breakthrough News. You'll also then be able to find it at The Katie Halper Show, youtube.com/The Katie Halper Show. And I'll be talking about this more moving forward, but I just wanted to let people know. And in the meantime, of course, free Palestine and support independent media. And of course, you can support The Katie Halper Show at Patreon. That's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. And please subscribe to this YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Katie Halper Show. And I think that's about it. I mean, I see a lot of comments. That's great. And I really want to thank everyone for being supportive of this show and of independent.
I think that basically sums up what happened. She tried to do a radar in which she defended Representative Rashida Tlaib for accurately identifying Israel as an apartheid state. And by the way, this isn't just some fringe opinion of some fringe member of Congress. This is literally the opinion of Amnesty International. Israel's apartheid against Palestinians. Let's look here. In May of 2021, Palestinian families in Sheikh Jarrah, a neighborhood in occupied East Jerusalem, began protesting against Israel's plan to forcibly evict them from their homes to make way for Jewish settlers. Many of the families are refugees who settled in Sheikh Jarrah after being forcibly displaced around the time of Israel's establishment as a state in 1948. Since Israel occupied East Jerusalem and the rest of the West Bank until 1967, Palestinians in Sheikh Jarrah have been continuously targeted by Israeli authorities who use discriminatory laws to systematically dispossess Palestinians of their land and homes for the benefit of Jewish Israelis. This is apartheid. So again, this is not some fringe view that's only held by, a few crazy radical leftist members of Congress or something like that. No, this is literally the viewpoint and opinion of Amnesty International, a viewpoint that apparently is no longer permissible on the Hill.
Yep. Yeah. Fucking crazy. I don't know. Yeah. The one thing I did want to mention that she talked about there, apparently they finally shot that pilot for the lefty view too. Gavin and I have been covering that for a while, the developments of like a potential lefty view. That would have been so base. Fuck the Hill for depriving us of that. But anyway, yeah, this is Ryan also coming out here, co-host of Hill's TV's Rising. Ryan obviously was on the Hill for a while, left to go be a part of the Breaking Points network. Recorded a segment this week on Israel's apartheid government. The segment was first held and then spiked, and the reporter, who after 3 years with the program was told she was done, pushback story. I actually read their monologue that she wrote, and in this piece, because Ryan links the I don't know, whatever her like actual writing, her teleprompter for it. And it seems so like it was a great monologue. It was very compelling. It made the point clearly and thoroughly and, you know, without compromise. So, yeah, just I mean, you know, you can't watch The Hill and expect to get like a fucking well-rounded view of what's happening, because clearly they're shearing the sheep to fucking, you know, meet their own fucking, you know.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned earlier about Nathan Robinson, he says, just remember that when one of us is fired, it not only keeps the audience from hearing our own views, but sends a message to everyone else that if they criticize Israel's apartheid or U.S. support for it, they will lose their job. And again, that's the even more chilling ramification here. Like, yes, it obviously sucks for Katie Halper personally. I mean, she's out of a job, I guess. Hopefully she gets picked up by Breakthrough News or Breaking Points or something like that. But the real issue here is the precedent this sets. Now, everyone else, like I said, is Brianna Joy Gray now going to be afraid to talk about Israel and Palestine on Rising? I don't think so. I'm not like, you know, casting her freaking character into question or anything. I'm sure she's, you know, more than willing to be consistent about that and all that stuff. But I'm just saying, like, you don't want to create that situation for any journalist where now there's certain things that are off limits to talk about. There are certain opinions that cross a line to espouse on your platform. So yeah, as Nathan Robinson says, it sends a message to everyone else that if they criticize Israel's apartheid or U.S. support for it, they will lose their job. So again, now if you work for The Hill, good luck doing a monologue about BDS or about anything related to this issue, because, you know, even if you do it, you're going to know in the back of your mind that, oh shit, like this might literally cost me my fucking livelihood. That's a terrible situation for a platform or an outlet or a publication that purports to do journalism, right? That's the complete opposite of the situation that should be set up. And again, this is not a fringe opinion. This is the opinion that is literally held by Amnesty International. I can only repeat it so many times. This is not some fringe conspiracy theory that we're talking about here. This is the literal reality on the ground. There's no other words to describe it. Like, what do you want me to come up with a new word to describe apartheid? Like, can I not just call a spade a spade? Like, it literally is. I would have gone farther. I would have called it a fucking ethno state. But, you know, apartheid's a little more polite, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is definitely like a marked, like a line in the sand now. Like, I mean, the fact that they just were so explicit, terminated everything, she's gone, no questions asked. Like, I do think this is a marked pivot for the Hill here. And I actually wanted to shout out Where Pilgrim here for something that they observed in the chat. Nexstar wants to go more mainstream, I think. Recall that they started News Nation before they acquired the Hill. And I think that's actually right on the money, where I think what's happening is they're going to try and use their, you know, million subs on YouTube to try and turn into like a more mainstream, you know, kind of like MSNBC, Fox News ball backing, like bounce that back and forth, instead of, you know, two authentic like populists behind the microphone, which again was what made their show a success in the first place, right? I mean, they are literally just shooting themselves in the feet here by this pivot. In my view, who knows, it might end up being a better business decision and all they care about is dollars and cents. But yeah, I think that's probably the you know, in the tea leaves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's 100% right. I think that they're absolutely going to kind of try to start pivoting into more of a mainstream direction, which is really disgusting given, you know, the fact that this whole project Rising was built by independent-minded people, populists, progressives, etc. The appeal of Rising was never that it was a platform you go to hear establishment talking points, you know, corporate talking points. That's the opposite. That's the only reason it was ever successful in the first place, is because, like, oh, there happens to be this one show out here where we can hear hosts and journalists and commentators giving opinions that aren't just the same fucking drivel that you hear on Fox News, CNN, and MSNBC. That was the whole fucking appeal. That was the only appeal. You think if Crystal and Sagar had just been, you know, regurgitating mainstream talking points, that anyone would have given a single fuck about Rising? No, they wouldn't have given a shit. It never would have taken off in the way that it did, and it wouldn't have been able to sustain itself going forward if they hadn't have, you know, continued that model of hiring people with populist opinions, with outside of the mainstream opinions. Again, even though I was never a big fan of Kim Iverson's takes, for example, there's no denying she had more of like a populist outlook. She was willing to say things that were outside of the mainstream, that she was willing to kind of push back on certain narratives. And the same goes with Katie Halper. So I just find this crazy. Yeah, I guess they're going to start bringing in just corporate hacks to replace these people. So that's total insanity. But I do think that's probably the direction we're going to see the Hill slowly but surely start going. I mean, I don't think they're going to start hiring anyone that's to the left of freaking Katie Halper and Brianna Joy right now. If they've clearly put this line, you can't talk about Israel Palestine. Okay, well that takes out a lot of people. That basically rules out everyone that's actually seriously on the left if you can't talk about that issue.